Support for this episode comes from US Med. As you'll find out, I'm a huge fan of choice when it comes to diabetes technology. We've come a long way since my son was diagnosed in 2006. And you want a medical supply company that can provide what you want. That's why I'm so excited to partner with US Med. They have whatever you need. They hold the #1 spot as the distributor for Freestyle Libre systems nationwide. They rank #1 in Dexcom customer surveys. They're the top specialty distributor for Omnipod Dash and the fastest growing tandem distributor nationwide. US Med always ensures you have 90 days worth of supplies and provides fast, free shipping to your doorstep. Plus, rest easy knowing they hold an A+ rating with the BBB. US Med, your trusted partner in diabetes care. Your health, satisfaction, and peace of mind are their priority. Find out more. Go to usmed.com/Stacey. That's usmed.com/STACEY. Today on Diabetes Connections Type 2. This time of year, diets are the center of a lot of conversations. So when I heard WeightWatchers was specifically offering something for people with diabetes, I wanted to learn more. WW, as they're now called, is teaming up with Abbott to use the Freestyle Libre CGM as part of a new program. So what does that really mean? What are they offering? Will it make a difference? I'm talking to the Chief Science Officer of WW and Chief Medical Officer of Abbott. Also this week, why is the fasting blood glucose test so important? And what are its limitations? This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Hello and welcome to Diabetes Connections Type 2. I'm your host, Stacey Sims, and if you're new around here, welcome. I've been podcasting about diabetes since 2015 with a focus on type 1 and people who use insulin. But we decided to expand to offer something for the type 2 community, and I'm really glad we did. We launched the show in November with the idea to give you information without nagging or lecturing. If you have type 2, I'm guessing you already get an earful about it, from your doctors, maybe from well-meaning family and friends. But that is not what this show is all about. We're here to get real with diabetes and give you information you can really use. So let's jump in with just a minute of some facts. This week, I want to talk about a fasting blood glucose test. I'm sure you've heard about this. You probably have taken one, but there's a lot going on here and some things you may not be aware of. This is a check of your blood glucose after you haven't eaten for 8 to 12 hours, usually overnight. When it's diagnosing diabetes, this is usually a blood draw in a lab, which is also called a fasting plasma level. But for evaluating treatment or just getting, an idea of blood sugar, it can be an in-office finger stick test. A fasting blood glucose test is designed to measure the amount of glucose, sugar, in your blood when it should be at its lowest. For most people, that happens in the morning and when you haven't had anything to eat or drink for a while. There is something called the dawn phenomenon, which we'll explain in more detail in another episode. But basically, this is an early morning rise in blood glucose in people who have diabetes. And sometimes a fasting blood glucose can come back well within normal range, but the A1C, a measure of 3 months' worth of blood glucose, can still be elevated. And that actually happened to my son. He was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes just before he turned 2. Well, his fasting blood glucose was 80, but then they did an A1C check, and that came back at 11.5, well within the diabetic range and pretty scary for a not yet 2-year-old. It is rarer for that to happen for people with type 2, but it is why the A1C is still considered the gold standard and the diagnostic test for diabetes. Much more information from Healthline. I will link all of this up in the show notes. Okay, my guests this week are here to talk about a new partnership, that between WeightWatchers, now called WW, and Abbott, makers of the Freestyle Libre. They sent me the information about this when it was announced late last summer. The idea here is to combine the community and the information about eating well from WeightWatchers with the real-time blood glucose information you get from a CGM to help people with diabetes thrive. I had a lot of questions. So you'll hear from Abbott's Chief Medical Officer, Mahmoud Kazemi, and WeightWatchers Chief Scientific Officer, Gary Foster, right after this. It can be pretty tricky to travel with insulin, especially if you're going somewhere very cold or somewhere very hot. We have found something that really works well for us, and that is the VIVI Cap from Tempramed. It keeps your insulin at the exact right temperature, even in the extreme heat or cold. And it works for any insulin pen. Super simple. You just take the cap off your insulin pen and you slide the VIVI Cap on. No batteries, no charging, no water or ice packs. It lasts for years and gives you 24/7, 365 protection because insulin is very temperature sensitive. VIVI Cap has a 30-day, 100% money-back guarantee, and it's got a 2-year warranty. Find out more. I've got a link in the show notes for you, or you can go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Tempermed VIVI Cap logo. Gary and Mahmoud, thank you so much for joining me. I'm really excited to welcome you to Diabetes Connections Type 2. Thanks for spending some time with me and my listeners.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. Well, this is going to be the first time I think that many of my listeners are going to hear what the Abbott Freestyle Libre actually does. I think everybody, has kind of a passing familiarity with it if they haven't seen somebody with it on, the back of the arm. But let me just start there. Mahmoud, can you take a moment to just explain what the Libre does?
Sure, Stacey. Thanks again for inviting Gary and me to come on. It's such a pleasure being here with you. So all the different versions of the Freestyle Libre system are continuous glucose monitoring systems, which are also known as CGMs. And these are basically devices that allow individuals living with diabetes to get their glucose data without needing to prick their fingertips multiple times a day. I think anyone who knows someone or is living themselves with diabetes is quite aware that in the past, we've always asked people to keep track of their glucose levels by doing finger sticks. And what we've been able to do now with the use of the Freestyle Libre system in the US and worldwide is really make that a thing of the past. The system basically includes a sensor that you apply to the back of your arm. And then this is associated with either an app on your smartphone or an external reader. You can pick whichever one that you prefer using. And the sensor basically allows the individual to keep track of their glucose values or their sugar values more colloquially. So depending on the version that they have, all the versions are quite small. So it can either be the size of up to 2 stacked quarters down to as small as 2 stacked pennies, which is our Freestyle Libre 3 system, which is now the world's smallest and most discrete sensor. And these sensors have a little filament. It's like basically the width of about 3 human hairs that sit beneath the skin surface. And they essentially are measuring the amount of glucose in the fluid between the body's cells. And then this data is basically available to the user every minute. And it's streamed in the case of the Freestyle Libre 3 system via Bluetooth. And it's really amazing what we're able to do with this because essentially, as compared to blood glucose monitoring, using continuous glucose monitoring allows individuals to get the entire picture of their glucose data. With blood glucose, we like to call it snapshots in time. It's like you're just taking a picture at a moment in time. You don't really know what happened before or what happened after. But with continuous glucose monitoring, it's essentially having the full video of your glucose, understanding what happened before, how different decisions you've made with respect to diet, exercise, medication have impacted your glucose values. And it really allows both the user and their healthcare provider to be able to make better decisions with respect to diabetes management.
Yeah, and you mentioned a couple of different versions. I know there are some different features of each without going into too deep into the nitty gritty. As we're speaking here at the end of October, what's available in the United States?
So the majority of people in the US will be using either the Freestyle Libre 2 or Freestyle Libre 3 systems. And both of these systems currently are 14-day systems, which are the longest wear duration that we have for a disposable sensor that is not implanted. So for ones that people place on themselves. And essentially, both these sensor systems, as I mentioned, work with either a smartphone app or with a reader, an external reader. And really the differences between them are essentially the footprint, the size of it. The Freestyle Libre 2 system is the one that I mentioned is 2 stacked quarters, and the Freestyle Libre 3 system is 2 stacked pennies. And the other difference is with the Freestyle Libre 2 system, you'll scan the sensor with either your phone or the reader to get your glucose values. But you'll still have minute-to-minute alarms if you enable those. But with the Freestyle Libre 3 system, basically you get the minute-to-minute streaming from the sensor to either your reader or your smartphone. So those are essentially the major differences that you can expect with them.
It's so interesting because my son lives with type 1 and my husband has type 2. And many years ago, my son used a Libre, like the first generation. And then, things kind of went on and he didn't use it. And then my husband recently got the Libre 3. And it is so much tinier than what we had expected. It's a big change from the first one for sure.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's we continue listening to feedback from our users, and we're always innovating to help sure that we meet their needs.
Well, Gary, let me, that's a great segue to go on to questions for you. I've got to be honest with you. I have used Weight Watchers before, and it's going to take me a minute to call it WW. So forgive me for that.
We're both Weight Watchers and WW, so don't struggle over the name.
Oh, okay, good. Can you talk then about what the Weight Watchers, what the diabetes tailored plan is, like broadly speaking?
Yeah, I think the biggest difference, well, let me start with why we developed the plan. Just
Sure.
scientifically, we know that about 90% of people with type 2 and about 50% of people with type 1 diabetes have either overweight or obesity. So we know both for medical reasons and also just listening to folks who are living with both overweight or obesity and diabetes, that weight loss is important for their health and overall well-being. So as we looked at our program for those not living with diabetes, there are some things that we do that aren't optimized for people living with diabetes. I'll give you an example. So for example, we have 0 point foods. You get a daily points budget, and we follow the WHO and the USDA guidelines for foods that are typically underconsumed if you want to have a healthy dietary pattern. So think lean proteins, fruits, veg. And one of the things that we heard continuously from people living with diabetes who were still using our program to lose weight is that, and 0 point foods are defined as you don't have to weigh them, measure them, or track them. It doesn't mean you eat whatever you want, whenever you want, but it tries to take the burden out of tracking everything you eat and drink. But for example, having fruits for people living with diabetes isn't the best idea, given that its ability to spike blood sugar. Similar things like non-fat yogurt have an effect on people with diabetes that they do not on people without. So we did a couple things. One is we modified a 0 point food list. So things like low-fat yogurt and fruit are no longer on it. And they really been, that 0 point foods list has been optimized to help people prevent spikes in blood sugar. So things like lean proteins, beans, high fiber foods, and the like. And that's really a big change. The other thing we did was to really listen to folks once, and that program came out a couple of years ago now. And what we listened to folks talk about a lot is, look, eating for optimal diabetes management is one thing, and that takes a lot of work and effort and thought and planning. But then coupled with that, I'm trying to eat for weight loss. That's sort of a whole different thing. So you can imagine when you're having a choice to eat something, should I worry about the carb content of that food or should I worry about the calories? And it gets very confusing very quickly. So that's one of the things we heard is we need it to be simple, and there's lots of misinformation out there. The other thing that we heard, which is really relevant to this Abbott and Weight Watchers partnership, is that folks were looking to lose weight to improve their diabetes. But they felt like, okay, weight is weight and I can measure that. But they wanted a more long-term measure, what they would call a beyond the scale measure of glucose. And they didn't want to wait 90 days to get an A1C from their doc. And they were also looking for real-time feedback in terms of what impact did their eating and activity choices have on their blood sugar. And that's really what led to the genesis of this collaboration with Abbott and Weight Watchers to take the number one company in weight management and the number one company in CGMs and really combine that experience so that we can help members living with diabetes lose weight, but also give them real-time feedback about the impact that eating and activity has on their blood sugar, both in the short term and in the long term.
Can you give me a little bit more info about what it might look like? Because I understand, the points and the zero value, that makes a lot of sense. You don't want to have a lot of foods that might be higher in carbs, right? Even though they're lower in sugar, which can be really confusing. So what does it look like in practice when you're talking about type 2 diabetes with Weight Watchers? In other words, is there a completely different app? Is there a different meeting? Is it working with someone who reads your CGM and talks to you about what points and foods work for you?
Yeah, it's all available in the app. So 100% of our members, whether you have diabetes or not, access our program through the app. And about 20 or so percent either go to our in-person physical workshops, think about like a brick and mortar setting, or to our virtual workshops that are available online. And really what it is a toggle. During the intake assessment, people are asked if they have diabetes or not. If they have diabetes, it's just a toggle switch So their program gets changed. So their 0 point food list gets changed. They'll have different content, different recipes, and it's a more customized experience for people living with diabetes who want to lose weight. It is not, and it's really important to make this distinction, a surround sound diabetes care management program. We're not advising people about retinal exams or podiatry care or other issues surrounding diabetes. What we're doing is using our expertise in effective weight management that's been empirically proven and customizing that experience to people living with diabetes.
Mahmoud, let me ask you, one of the anecdotal things that I find happens when friends of mine, or certainly my husband, got a CGM, is they look at it a billion times a day, right? The first week, that's all they're doing is looking at that number and say, did you know an apple will do this? Did you know the dinner did that? Look, I had a cup of coffee and this happened. They're looking at their glucose in a completely different way because you've never been able to look at it that way before. I'm curious, and I don't know exactly what I'm asking here, because if you don't have the data, I'm not quite sure how to answer it. But I guess what I'm asking is, when you're dealing with folks who are trying to lose weight, right? That's not exactly the same exact thing as trying to spend more time in range and that kind of thing. Can you talk to me a little bit about how the information people get from their CGM does tend to help them figure out how to eat in ways that won't spike their blood glucose?
Absolutely. It's interesting that you asked that, because my background is that I'm an endocrinologist, and I actually was in clinical practice for many years and would often meet people living with type 2 diabetes. And you sort of hit the nail on the head when you said, it's really fascinating what happens when you get your hands on a CGM, because the number one question I would get back then is, doctor, just tell me what to eat. And that's such a, open-ended question of what can I eat? What can I eat? It's not really that you can or can't eat in an absolute sense anything. It's just a matter of understanding how your body responds to different foods. And that's the beauty of CGMs, including Freestyle Libre, is that especially now paired up with WW, what you can easily do, as you were alluding to this with your husband, is that once you get your hands on the system, you can actually see what the impact of a food is for you. It's actually individualized guidance as opposed to generic dietary advice that we used to give, and which could be, maybe helpful in some cases, but more often than not really. And I think to get to your point that you'd asked about sort of, time in range versus weight loss. Well, with people with type 2, as you know, most of them are really interested in losing weight. And we know that with that weight loss, they can improve their glycemic control, because generally with weight loss, there is a reduction in average glucose values. And one of the ways you can do that actually is by, as you mentioned yourself, looking at the spikes with certain foods. So if you know, for example, that having 2 cups of rice is going to give you a real high level in your glucose afterwards, but that maybe taking 1 cup of rice won't have that same impact. Using CGM and WW app, you can basically get to the point where you understand how you can keep yourself in a tighter range. And that by itself actually can be very beneficial in not only normalizing the glucose, but also limiting portion sizes and helping people lose weight.
Gary, anything to add to that?
Yeah, no, I think Mahmoud nailed it. And I think to operationalize it within the WW system for folks who know that people get a certain number of points per day. And if you eat plus or minus those points on a daily basis, and we give lots of flexibility for going over and going under on some days, we're really based on real life, you will lose weight. But to Mahmoud's point, you can lose weight and your blood sugar will reliably go down and your A1C will go down. Our own studies have shown that after 6 months, in a study we just published earlier this year, that you get a reduction in A1C of 0.75 at 6 months. But really the magic of this integration, as people are talking about it, is using the rice example. That has the same number of points, but if I find that I can eat beans instead of rice, for example, or I can eat this instead of that, and it keeps me in range more, that's an added incentive and greater personalization, to Mahmoud's point, about what foods I can eat and how they impact my blood sugar. And really, again, to Mahmoud's point, it's not, this food is bad or this food is good. That's moralistic thinking about eating and weight management. And that's frankly just nonsense. It doesn't help the process and it's inaccurate. But rather, how can the CGM provide real-time data for the various choices I have within a certain points budget?
Gary, you just said something that I really wanted to ask about, and I'm glad you brought that up. I think there's the perception sometimes that at Weight Watchers and at meetings with dietitians, that people are going to be told, you can never have that again. This food is bad. right? No, and you're going to be shamed about it. And I think it's one of the reasons why people don't pursue this kind of thing. Can you talk a little bit more about Weight Watchers not doing that? Because I think there may be a perception for people who have never done it that if I sign up for this, I'm never having dessert again. I'm never having rice again. I can't eat a potato in my life. Right back to our conversation in just a moment. But first, support for this episode comes from AG1. You know, people say they're not big breakfast people or, they don't like to eat a lot in the morning. I love breakfast and I eat every morning, but I felt like I wasn't getting enough vitamins and I really don't like taking a lot of pills in the morning. So I started drinking AG1. And that makes it really easy. It is a science-driven formulation of vitamins, probiotics, and whole food sourced nutrients. AG1 helps you build your health foundation first. You can mix it with water or put it in a smoothie. That's how I like to drink it. And then I feel good knowing I've taken care of my health. Since 2010, they've improved their formula 52 times in the pursuit of making the best foundational nutrition supplement possible through high-quality ingredients and rigorous standards. If you want to take ownership of your health, it starts with AG1. Try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first purchase. Go to drinkag1.com/Stacy. That's drinkag1.com/Stacy. Check it out.
Yeah, it sounds like a terrible way to live, if you ask me. And it's not sustainable. Like, we have great data that we can sustain weight losses, not just at 1 year, not just at 2 years, but 5 years. And part of that, the reason for those impressive data are that the program is designed for long-term sustainability. One of our favorite mantras at Weight Watchers is no food is off the menu. And you have to eat foods that you love. Now, to make it sustainable. Now, does that mean you eat them as frequently or as much of them as you did? No, that's not reality. And we don't just make up things, to market. We're really based in science. But the science of long-term behavior change is that the more restrictive your choices are, you can do that for like 3 hours, maybe 3 days, maybe on the outside 3 weeks. But you should run away, not walk, but run away if you hear a program saying things like you can never have this and you must always have that. Those programs, by definition, are not sustainable. And our program is just the opposite of that.
Mahmoud, do you want to kind of from the endocrinology perspective, there is the danger of disordered eating for people with diabetes. And could you talk a little bit about, I assume you have the same warning, Mahmoud, for your patients to run away from programs that tell you to never eat something you like again.
Yeah, absolutely. Because to Gary's point, those are essentially programs that are not sustainable. That's the exact same thing as when you hear of these different fad diets or different ways that people are told to eat. None of those actually have long-term success. So you bring up a great point about disordered eating. That is unfortunately not uncommon in both type 2 and in type 1 diabetes. And really the benefit of using a CGM like Freestyle Libre in combination with the WW app is it allows you to basically get over that thinking process that I can have this or I can't have that. It basically shows you how much of something you could take in and see what your body's response is to that. Because, it's quite eye-opening, as I'm sure you've seen yourself with your husband's situation. Certain foods that one might expect are completely off limits. You can actually get away with having a certain, smaller portion of it. And things that you thought, things that obviously strike everyone as being very healthy, things, to the point that Gary brought up around fruit or things like that were traditionally thought, oh, these are great, you should be having these. You sort of get a great sense that, yeah, you can have them, but you also do need to be a bit on the careful side that you're not having them in excess. So I think that the beauty of it is it allows individuals to actually see and come up with a plan that works for them because it's actually tailored to their own body and their own response.
Yeah. Both companies, put out a news release talking about all of this a couple of weeks ago. And in that release, it talked about decreasing diabetes distress. As a mom of a kid with type 1, this is a big topic in my house. It has been over the years, trying to reduce this kind of thing. And for my husband with type 2 as well. But it says the program can decrease diabetes distress by close to 10%. How is that measured? What are you measuring there? And how does this program help?
It's measured by a diabetes distress survey or diabetes distress scale. And it's a 17-item scale. And it has 4 different components, all of which people listening who are living with diabetes, I think, will resonate with each of these constructs. One is emotional burden. just stressed out by just having the chronic condition of diabetes. You're worrying about complications. It's just getting you down. The second is physician-related distress, and that is feeling like your doctor doesn't understand, perhaps, or that your doctor may be a tad judgmental around A1C time, or just not providing you the support. The third is regimen-related distress, and that's basically how I feel about managing my diabetes. Do I feel like I'm tracking my blood sugar well enough? Am I in range enough? All of those sort of self-evaluations around how I'm doing managing my condition. And then the final and fourth one is called interpersonal distress. And that is, do folks around me help me as much as I would like? Do they really understand what it's like to go from high to low and in between? And so those four factors make up a score called diabetes distress. And what we found in our study that was published earlier this year, in addition to providing a 5% weight loss and also a 0.75 reduction in A1C, we're able to reduce diabetes distress by 10%. And of all those four components that I just mentioned, the one that had the biggest decrease was regimen-related distress. And that really gave us a lot of pleasure and pride, because what we had heard from folks who wanted to lose weight, who are also living with diabetes, is it's a lot to manage, eating for diabetes, as I mentioned, eating for weight. And we were really worried in some ways, to be transparent, that we're going to make this too complicated. So our product developers really put a focus on simplicity, and that turned to pay off well in terms of the data, that not only was distress the same with an improved A1C, the distress associated with having diabetes was decreased by 10%. And in addition, A1C went down by 0.75. So we were really delighted by those findings.
I was really glad that it was included at all, because I feel like sometimes people who don't have diabetes look at the community and say, well, just do X, Y, Z, and it'll be fine. And they're not taking into account these other less easy to measure factors. Mahmoud, could you comment on that a little bit?
Sure. I mean, I think that really when you're in clinical practice and seeing lots of folks who are living with diabetes, you very quickly catch on that, yes, certainly you have to talk about some of the numbers and medication adjustments, et cetera. But I would honestly spend about half my visit talking about these issues, such as, again, diabetes distress in a clinical perspective, essentially all of the mental health aspects of living with diabetes, which I had the luxury of doing so as an endocrinologist, because I had dedicated time that was essentially devoted to talking about the different aspects of diabetes. In many cases, especially for people living with type 2, they don't get to see an endocrinologist. They get to see their primary care provider, who's doing the best job that they can, but is obviously managing multiple conditions and is not just focused entirely on diabetes. So by being able to partner up with WWE and providing data that we do through our Freestyle Libre system, the honest empowerment that occurs for people living with diabetes, it's oftentimes when I talk with folks who are living with diabetes, when they have the ability to use a CGM, they feel for the first time that things just aren't happening to them with diabetes, but that they actually are making decisions that have an impact. And it's a completely liberating feeling for someone who's felt like this has entirely been out of their hands for so long, that they can actually make decisions and they know exactly what's going to happen as a result of it. It takes the unknown out of the equation for many people.
All right. I can't do a podcast episode about weight loss and diabetes without bringing up Ozempic and Mounjaro. I know people are going to ask about this. Are they part of the program?
I'll let Gary speak to it as far as WW, but as far as CGMs go, we really feel that regardless of the drug class that's used, whether it's Ozempic or any other type of drug class that's being used for diabetes management, that it's complementary with CGM. So CGM is essentially providing you feedback, like I mentioned, whether it's your dietary choices, your medication choices, et cetera. It really is the essential complement for anyone living with diabetes. And we've actually put out data already that shows that people who are using Freestyle Libre have better adherence with their medication regimens, including GLP-1s. So we really feel that these are complementary approaches. I'll turn it over to Gary to talk about the WW side.
Yeah, I think from an obesity management point of view, this is a significant inflection in the treatment of obesity, the likes of which I haven't seen in over 30 years of doing research and clinical work. And it doesn't mean that these medications are for everyone, but their side effect profile is much better than previous generations of anti-obesity meds, and their efficacy is 3 or 4-fold. And it seems like there are 3 or 4 legitimate pipeline candidates coming in the next 2 or 3 years. So we, as a result of that, again, I want to be very clear, that doesn't mean medications are for everybody, or we think 50% of people are going to be in medications in the next few years. But we do think as science evolves, we need to evolve. So we think it's a great thing to have in our toolbox. As a result, we've purchased a telemedicine company where people can meet with an obesity specialist, healthcare provider, and decide if medications are appropriate, which medications would be appropriate. And that could be the GLP-1s, or it could be first-generation medications, all of which, importantly, by the FDA label, have to be coupled with a behavior modification program like ours. So we think it's part of our continuing evolution. We don't think it's a left turn or a right turn. We think it's the best thing to do for our members, and we'll continue to stay on top of what people are looking for and what science can reliably provide to continue to innovate on our approach.
Just to be clear, and this may seem like an obvious point, but I know how quickly news goes by these days. So to kind of put a fine point on it, if you go to Weight Watchers and you're interested in talking about a medication to help you lose weight in addition to the program, you must see a medical professional, right? You're going to see a healthcare provider. You're not going to go into a Weight Watchers meeting and have the person next to you say, hey, have you tried this?
That's absolutely correct. Look, there is lots of social media buzz around these medications, most of which is misinformation, which is why we wanted to enter the field and take a leadership position in educating and debunking myths. But to your point, it wouldn't be, our coaches, for example, are not saying, oh, medications may be right for you. It's well beyond their scope of practice and their expertise. If they were interested, what they'd be told is talk to their own healthcare provider, or to call or to connect with our telemedicine platform so they can learn more about the meds. And it's really a decision that ultimately a physician or other healthcare provider and the patient have to make on their own. And we don't think we have a role at Weight Watchers of deciding what that decision is or even what medication people should be on. That's clearly between an individual patient and their healthcare provider.
Got it. As I mentioned at the beginning, I've gone through some of the Weight Watchers programs before. And for me, the part that makes the difference, honestly, is that group meeting. You just mentioned the coaches or the group leaders. Is there this kind of community support for the diabetes program?
Yeah, there really is. One of the things we take pride in is our community. And we were founded over 60 years ago by Jean Nidetch, who had the infinite wisdom at that point to say, look, she went to the New York City Department of Health and got, quote, a diet at the time, and realized it wasn't as easy as it looked, and it would be easier with other people. So she gathered some people in her kitchen, then her living room, then the downstairs of her apartment building, and then Weight Watchers was born some 60 years ago. We've continued to evolve that sense of community. So now we have a digital community called Connect, which is exclusively for Weight Watchers member. And there are many, many affinity groups in that Connect. And one of them is specifically for people living with diabetes, where you can share some of this emotional burden that we talked about earlier, the ups and downs of the journey and how it can be frustrating to do, quote, everything right and still see some spikes in your blood sugar, also diabetes-friendly recipes, and other things that just help customize the experience. There's nothing like, so the wisdom of our founder, nothing like peer-to-peer support and being around those who are going through a similar journey.
And Mahmoud, let me just ask you before I let you go, a little bit of nuts and bolts here. How does it work? I guess what I'm asking is, when someone joins, do they have to take multiple steps? Do they go to Weight Watchers and then they have to see their doctor to get the CGM?
So you do need a prescription in the US to be able to get any of the Freestyle Libre systems. And essentially what will happen is once you start using the system, as Gary had mentioned, the WW app is where you'll be actually interfacing the glucose values with what your dietary intake has been. So we do actually have an app, as I'd mentioned, that will capture glucose values for you. But if you are using the integrated program with WW, the beauty of it is that those glucose values will populate into the WW app, and you'll be able to actually see what's happening with your glucose value in relation to what you're doing with the WW program. So it is a fully integrated experience, but you do need a prescription to get to your original point in order to be able to get a Freestyle Libre system in the US.
I started this podcast because I feel like this is a really interesting and exciting time for people with type 2 diabetes. There are just more options. As an endocrinologist, how excited are you right now?
Oh, I think that, this past year has shown much more promise in the field of type 2 diabetes than I could say the past 10 years combined, I'll be honest with you. So I think that, not only is there excitement about these medications as far as what they can do for obesity, but from a medical perspective, look at what they're doing in terms of reduction of complication risks, right? So the big reason that we worry about diabetes is the fact that it can lead to many different end organ harm scenarios. And what we're seeing with the use of these medications, GLP-1 receptor agonists, is that they are in fact reducing the risk of these types of complications, whether it involve the kidney, involve the cardiovascular system. And that, from a medical perspective, is really important and meaningful. Not that weight loss isn't. Obviously, that's also a very key aspect of how these medications work and a main reason that people do necessarily want to go on them. But on the medical community side, we're very excited that they not only help improve weight and they help improve overall glucose control, but they actually help move on and actually help prevent some of these complications that we always worry about for individuals who are living with diabetes. So I think this is really a time of great promise for people living with type 2. And I'm really glad that you have this podcast because you can help spread the word and get people involved with using CGMs and using WW and really benefiting from all these advances we've had in the past several years.
And Gary, let me kind of finish up with you by asking the same question. Weight Watchers has been around for a long time, a lot of success. But there seems to be a feeling that there are so many more tools now that you're obviously taking advantage of here. What gets you excited about this?
I think so much gets me excited. To Mahmood's point, we have a new tool in the toolbox with medications that not only show improvements in weight loss, that's great, but to what end? To what end is it improves things like diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and actually reduces early stage results seem to show that at least one medication in this GLP-1 class actually reduces things like heart attacks and strokes for people with obesity, but without diabetes. So presumably at lower risk and still getting great effects. And I think, look, what's really encouraging to me is that people with obesity are now getting the attention they deserve with multiple treatment options. For years, we've been able to treat diabetes with 5, 6, 8, 10 different medications, same with high blood pressure. Up to this point, most of the medications used to treat obesity were modestly effective at best, and many of them had pretty untoward looking side effect profiles. So I expect this is just the beginning. And again, it's not just behavior. It's not an either or, it's an and, that we can take the best of behavioral treatment and now couple that with the best of biological treatment. And for some people, they will do fantastically well on a behavioral program alone. Others will decide with their healthcare provider that they need another tool in the toolbox. And we're happy to meet that need and to see the field evolve over time.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Thank you so much for spending so much time with me and my listeners. I appreciate the information, and I hope we talk again soon. Thanks so much.
I do too. My pleasure.
Thank you.
More information about WW and Abbott and the joint program in the show notes. Wherever you are listening, if you're in a podcast app, you should be able to scroll down. Some of them don't really display links that well, so you can always head on over to diabetes-connections.com. Just make sure that you click on the Type 2 show. I do another show all about Type 1. So make sure you've got Type 2 there, and every episode should really be very easy to access. By the way, if you've signed up for Weight Watchers and Abbott together, or you do it down the road, I would love to know what you think. What is it really like? How does it work in the real world? So you can always find me, Stacey, at diabetes-connections.com, or reach out on social and give me your feedback. I think it's really interesting. And I'm curious, people who use CGM to learn about how food affects them. This is such a whole new world. CGM really hasn't been out there for very long. And boy, is it changing the game. All right. Thank you, as always, to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Stacey Sims. I'll see you back here soon. Until then, be kind to yourself.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.